A constitutional lawyer and former candidate for state auditor joins me with an important message for suburban voters ahead of Election Day. Next. Ryan Wilson was the candidate for state auditor endorsed by the GOP back in 2020. Ryan, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
I want to start with a recent win in court. The Minnesota Supreme Court has said that Hennepin County has to get to work now to find absentee board judges. Let's just start with a bit of background on this case and then explain that. How big of a win really is this?
Yeah, so this case was brought after about a month of trying to get from Hennepin County who the election judges were that they appointed. And they had fought and didn't want to give up that information despite the Minnesota Data Practices Act requiring it. Well, once we finally got it, we saw that they hadn't appointed any judges from the Republican Party list of approved judges. And that's what the law says. So the law says that every election cycle, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, all the major parties, provide a list of election judges to the Secretary of State, who then forwards them on to the counties. And the counties have to exhaust that list before they move on and start finding other judges. What we argued, and successfully, is that they didn't exhaust that list. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled on and ordered Hennepin County to do, which is go back to that list, find election judges from it, and until that's exhausted, you can't move on to somewhere else. The Republican Party forwarded on 1,500 election judges. And so we knew that they hadn't exhausted. They hadn't even looked at it. And so we saw, and since that time now, an email has gone out, and they're actively looking, to comply with this order, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, there's only a couple days left, in the election now, and it would have been nice for them to be following the law from the beginning. And so it was a good order from the court. It was a complete repudiation of the arguments by Secretary Simon and Hennepin County, which really didn't hold any water, and were completely contrary to what the court had said 2 years ago. And so it's a good win for the rule of law. It's a good win, good ruling by the Supreme Court. We're pleased with it, and we expect Hennepin County and all counties to comply with the law here on out.
With just days to go before the election, experts have said that voters in this state have become extremely important. What are you hearing at this point? Is Minnesota really in play for Trump this time around?
Minnesota's been starting to trend more Republican over the last couple of cycles, especially if you look at outstate. It's gone almost completely, as they say, red, and it's really that suburbs and the urban core that are still the main voters for the Democrats, with the suburban voters being the swing. And that was really the reason I wanted to put my piece out there, was to make the case to the suburban voters who do go, both Republican and Democrat, why the policies of Trump and Vance are the right policies for them. Are going to set them up, for success with their families, with their jobs, with their lives, and why that is that's the better of the two administrations for them.
Yeah, let's get into that. You're referring to this opinion piece that was featured recently in the Minnesota Star Tribune, where you said, quote, their policies are not a collection of populist promises, but a carefully crafted vision that aims to improve life for our families, children, and elderly parents. Trump and Vance offer the leadership that Minnesota suburbs need across several intertwined policies. And one note here that I wanted to bring up, in your race for state auditor back in 2020, you were the closest candidate to winning a statewide election in almost 20 years. So I think you know a thing or two about appealing to those suburban voters. But what compelled you to go ahead and put this in print?
Yeah, and that was part of it. When I ran my race for state auditor, which we came close, I think 8,000 votes was the difference, a third of a percent. We had a broad message that wanted to appeal to kind of core Minnesotan values. And I saw a lot of those same values in the Trump-Vance ticket. And again, at the core of what they're offering is really a pro-family agenda, a pro-family set of policies. And it's a set of policies that are going to help the middle class by boosting the economy, by allowing people to be able to save more for retirement, save more for their college kids, be able to help their parents as their parents can retire and age, and really, help families have some breathing space so that they're not under the pressure of inflation as much as they have been these last couple of years, and high prices, high taxes, and the kinds of things that keep families from really being successful. And again, that's kind of the common theme throughout the Trump-Vance platform, is this pro-family agenda, again, to help families, to help the suburban families, to help the middle class, to help strengthen them. And again, that's why that was the purpose of this piece. And there's a lot of other places that obviously that their ticket can help and support kind of across the board. But I wanted to focus on why those suburban voters should consider voting for Trump and for Vance this time.
And the DFL made their priorities, it seems quite clear, Ryan, during the last legislative session. What really is at stake then for voters here in Minnesota?
Right. Obviously, we hope that Trump can get a win here and stop the decades-long streak of Democrats winning at the presidential level. But these local races and what happens in our state house is incredibly important to Minnesotans. We saw over the last 2 years, Democrats had total control of both chambers of the legislature as well as the governor's office, and they used that total control to run through a very progressive, extreme agenda that's out of line with a lot of Minnesotans. We talked a little bit about this in my op-ed. Minnesotans really want to return to normalcy. A lot of these policies and a lot of these laws that were pushed are too extreme for a lot of Minnesotans. And so I think what we'll see here is kind of a regression back to the middle. Voters wanting, and a lot of these races are suburban races, saying that's too much, it's enough. I don't agree with these policies. They don't fit my family. They don't fit my values. They don't help us. And so I would expect to see that the House, turns back to Republican, and we see some of that more bipartisan governing. We'll have, hopefully, there's a single Senate seat that's open as well. Hopefully we can win that as well. Obviously, the governor will continue to be Democrat. Bipartisanship is good. It's good to be able to have people come together and not just govern for 50% of the people, but 100% of the people.
And going back to Trump and Vance and their policies, in those is an economic plan focused, as you've said, on the middle class and job creation, specifically in Minnesota. Well, why does that matter, and why is that so important this time around?
When a family knows that their jobs are stable and they know that pay is going to continue to increase at a steady rate, outpace inflation and the cost of their groceries and the cost of their gas, they can start to plan for the future. It's not living paycheck to paycheck, but they can plan to say, I want my kid to go to school. I don't want them to have to be burdened by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans. I want to help them maybe get a foot up, and I want to help be a part of it. So if I can help save a little bit for my kids to go to college and make it a little easier on them, that's a good thing. We should want some of that in Minnesota, and not to be reliant as much on government programs. And again, that's where a strong economy is going to help the middle class. It's going to help boost them and can give them the confidence that they can be successful, and again, they can start to think and plan, and maybe it's starting a new business. Again, maybe it's, like I said, helping that elderly parent. A strong economy really supports those suburban middle-class voters.
Unlike the nonsense we might hear on the nightly news, crime is not down in this state. And Trump, we know, has always kind of been a law and order type of guy. He doesn't hold back there. He seems ready to fight back also against the fentanyl crisis, illegal immigration, as you point out in your piece, and other crime-related problems. What do you think of that situation when for so long that this state really did not make the news for crime, but we know that has certainly changed these last few years?
And obviously, we're quite a ways away from from the southern border here in Minnesota, and so it's easy for people not to make the connection between what's happening there, unchecked illegal immigration, and what they're seeing happen here, which is a crime wave that's come through over the last couple of years. Record rates of violent crimes in Minnesota, and not being able to make those connections. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. Trump and Vance have done a good job connecting. What does it mean to have unchecked open borders under Biden and Harris, and how that's affecting us here locally. And the most direct, besides the gang members coming up, and law enforcement will be more than happy to speak to this. Their data shows it that a lot of crimes are being committed by gang members, by illegal immigrants that are not the best and brightest coming from these other countries, but in some cases some of the more violent violent criminals. But really, the sad part about these open borders, one of the saddest parts of these open borders is the fentanyl crisis. And that is something that people do see here on a daily basis. The ODs, the deaths, the people that are feeling it in their families. Maybe the first time that somebody's tried some of these drugs and having fatal and catastrophic outcomes. Every one of those drugs has come across that southern border, come into the country illegally, and that is a direct result of the Biden-Harris open borders. Again, I think voting for Biden-Harris, voting for secure borders, voting for a humane immigration policy, one where legal immigrants can come in, that there's a way to bring in the workers that our businesses need here, and to keep out the people that shouldn't be in our country. I think that I'm hearing from again, these suburban families that this is something that they want. They don't want the drugs in their schools. They don't want the drugs in their streets, in their homes. One of the best ways to stop that, again, is by sealing up that southern border.
Aside from violent crime in Minnesota, we've seen attacks on our First Amendment. In fact, the Minnesota governor and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz has said there's no guarantee to free speech. We've heard that a few times. But if Trump and Vance are elected next week, do you think attitudes will change.
I hope so. And Senator Vance in particular has been pretty vocal on the need for First Amendment protections, the need, on college campuses being able to speak freely, to have those open dialogues, to not stifle conversations. And I think we'll see a sea change there. A lot of that, comes from, whether it be executive action or just really setting the tone of what's acceptable and not acceptable. And I would expect that we would see a new era of free speech. We certainly won't see one where, the government is, working and colluding with, social media giants to be able to suppress speech, as now become evident over the last couple of years. And so we'll return to more of a free market of speech where all the ideas can compete for their space in the marketplace, and the better ideas will rise to the top. And the best way to combat bad speech is better speech. And I think we'll return to that classic era that used to be something that was a stalwart of the Democrat Party. Years ago, that was a plank that the Democrats had, and we've really seen them abandon that. And I think it's found a good home in Republicans, which where that constitutional respect really falls kind of naturally. And I talk a little bit about that in the op-ed, which is really the party of respecting the Constitution and enforcing the Constitution.
Constitutional lawyer and former candidate for state auditor Ryan Wilson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
That'll do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We will see you next time.